The courtroom in the Royal Courts of Justice was a crucible of tension, its oak-paneled walls and towering ceilings amplifying the weight of every word. Outside, autumn leaves swirled across the Strand under a grey London sky. But within these walls, the air crackled with conflict. It was October 2025, and Captain Nathaniel Reed, a Royal Guardsman, stood at the center of a storm. His scarlet tunic was immaculate, his boots polished to a mirror sheen, but it was the small silver cross pinned to his chest that drew every eye. Judge Edward Halbridge, a stern figure with a reputation for unyielding adherence to protocol, had just issued a command that cut through the room like a saber. Reed was to remove the cross, deemed incompatible with the court's expectation of religious neutrality. Reed did not flinch. His posture was parade ground perfect. His hands clasped behind his back, his blue eyes locked on the judge with a calm, unyielding resolve. The gallery, packed with journalists, military personnel, veterans, and curious onlookers, stirred with whispers. This was no mere procedural dispute. It was a clash of titans, individual faith against institutional authority. The question hung in the air, unspoken but palpable. When personal belief collided with the law's cold machinery, who held the moral high ground? The answer was far from clear, and the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. At 40, Nathaniel Reed was a man shaped by war and sacrifice. A veteran of the British Army, he had served in the brutal deserts of Kandahar, Afghanistan, where survival was a daily gamble. There, in Dwoitindidon, he had forged an unbreakable bond with Private Ellis Granger, a Yorkshire lad whose infectious optimism could light up even the darkest foxhole. They had shared everything: rations, stories, fears, and the unspoken pact that they would have each other's backs. During a patrol in a sun-scorched village, their unit was ambushed. The air exploded with gunfire, and Granger fell, blood pooling beneath him. Reed, already wounded by shrapnel in his leg, dragged his friend to cover, bullets tearing up the earth around them. "Stay with me, Ellis," he rasped, pressing a bandage to Granger's chest. But the light in Granger's eyes was fading. With trembling hands, the young soldier unhooked a silver cross from his neck, a family heirloom, blessed by his grandmother, and pressed it into Reed's palm. "Keep it," he whispered. "It's my faith, and yours now." Moments later, he was gone. Reed survived, though the scars on his body and soul would never fully heal. The cross became his talisman, a tangible link to Granger's memory and a symbol of the faith that had sustained them through the crucible of war. He wore it always, pinned discreetly to his uniform, a quiet tribute to a friend who had given everything. For years, no one had questioned it. The Ministry of Defense had granted formal permission 3 years prior, recognizing the cross as both a religious and commemorative symbol under military regulations. But today, in this courtroom, that permission was under siege. Judge Halbridge leaned forward, his voice sharp with authority. "Captain Reed, I will not repeat myself. Remove the cross, or you will be held in contempt of this court." The words were a gauntlet, and the gallery fell silent. Reed's response was measured, his tone respectful but resolute. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I cannot comply. This cross is a debt I owe to a fallen comrade." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some nodded in approval. Others whispered in surprise. Halbridge's face tightened. A career jurist, he was unaccustomed to defiance. His courtroom, a realm where his word was law. To him, Reed's refusal was an affront, a challenge to the court's supremacy. "You are a soldier, Captain," he said coldly. "You of all people should understand the importance of following orders." Reed's eyes met the judge's, unflinching. "I understand duty, Your Honor, and my duty to this cross outweighs any order to remove it." The standoff escalated swiftly. Halbridge, his patience exhausted, declared a recess and ordered Reed to face a new hearing for contempt of court. The gavel fell like thunder, and the room erupted in hushed conversation as Reed was escorted out, his his head high, the cross still gleaming on his chest. Outside, the Strand bustled with oblivious passers-by, but Reed's mind was already at work. This was no act of reckless rebellion. He had anticipated this moment, prepared for it, and he was ready to fight not with fists, but with the law itself. In his modest Vauxhall flat, Reed shed his ceremonial uniform and sat at a desk cluttered with legal texts and papers. The room was sparse, its walls adorned only with a framed photograph of his old unit in Afghanistan and a simple wooden cross above the door. Few knew that Reed was more than a soldier. Before enlisting, he had studied law at Cambridge, graduating with honors and later serving as a legal advisor in the Army's Judge Advocate General's Corps. His knowledge of military and international law was formidable, and he had not forgotten it. As London's lights flickered to life outside, Reed opened his laptop and began to work. He drafted letters, reviewed the regulations, and called Colonel Harriet Lorne, a retired officer who had once been his mentor. Lorne, now an advocate for veterans' rights, confirmed what Reed already knew. The Ministry of Defense's exemption letter, signed by a brigadier, was ironclad. "They have overstepped, Nathaniel," she said, her voice firm. "Halbridge's order doesn't hold water." Reed spent the next 2 days in a flurry of preparation. He compiled a dossier of legal precedents, from the European Convention on Human Rights to UK military regulations, all affirming the right to religious expression in uniform. He cross-referenced the court's procedures, identifying flaws in the contempt summons that could render it invalid. He pored over case law, including a 2013 European court ruling that upheld soldiers' rights to discrete religious symbols. His nights were sleepless, fueled by black coffee and a quiet determination to honor Granger's memory. This was not about pride. It was about principle. The cross was not just metal. It was a promise, forged in blood and loss. The second hearing arrived under a sky heavy with rain. The courtroom was packed, the gallery now swollen with reporters, veterans groups, MPs, and even a bishop who had heard of the case. Reed entered in full dress uniform, the silver cross gleaming defiantly. His bearing was that of a man who knew his ground and intended to hold it. Judge Halbridge, his expression a mask of resolve, opened the proceedings with a pointed question. "Captain Reed, have you reconsidered your position?" The room was silent, every eye on Reed. He stepped forward, his voice clear and steady. "Your Honor, with permission, I would like to present evidence in my defense." What followed was a masterclass in legal precision. Reed produced the Ministry of Defense's exemption letter, its seal unmistakable. He cited Article 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights, guaranteeing freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. He referenced the 2013 European Court ruling and other precedents, building an unassailable case. Then, with surgical accuracy, he dismantled the contempt summons, pointing out procedural errors. The court had failed to specify the legal basis for its order, rendering the charge invalid under the Contempt of Court Act 1981. The gallery listened, rapt, as Reed spoke not with anger, but with the quiet authority of a man who had fought battles far bloodier than this. Halbridge's composure began to crack. His eyes darted to Reed's dossier, then back to the soldier. It was dawning on the judge that he was not facing a mere guardsman, but a legal mind as sharp as any barrister. The prosecutor, a young lawyer who had underestimated Reed, fumbled through a response, but the tide had turned. Halbridge called a recess, retreating to his chambers with Reed's documents. When he returned, his tone was different, less imperious, more reflective. "Captain Reed," he said, "this court has reviewed your submissions. An error was made in the issuance of the contempt charge. Your right to wear the cross is upheld by existing regulations. The charges are dismissed." A ripple of applause broke out, quickly silenced by the judge's raised hand. Then, in a rare moment of humility, Halbridge added, "I would like to speak with you privately after these proceedings. This court owes you an apology." The room was still as Reed nodded, his expression unchanged, but his eyes softening. The gavel fell, and the case was over. But the story was not. As the gallery emptied, a journalist approached Reed, asking if he would share the story behind the cross. Reed hesitated, then agreed, in a quiet corner of the courthouse. With reporters, onlookers, and even Halbridge listening, he spoke. He told of Kandahar, of Granger's courage and laughter, of the ambush that took his friend's life. He spoke of the cross, not just as a religious icon, but as a symbol of sacrifice, a promise to carry on. He spoke of his family, his grandfather at Dunkirk, his mother who taught him faith was about love, not dogma. He spoke of the veterans he met at memorials, men and women who carried their own crosses, literal and figurative, in honor of the fallen. The listeners were silent, some with tears in their eyes. Halbridge, his earlier sternness gone, nodded slowly, his face etched with understanding. As Reed left the courthouse, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the Strand. The cross on his uniform caught the light, a small beacon of his victory, not over Halbridge, but for the principles he held dear. The crowd outside parted as he walked, some offering nods, others watching in awe. To them, he was a soldier who had stood his ground, not with a rifle but with words and conviction. Reporters would write their stories, and X would buzz with clips of the hearing. But Reed cared little for the spotlight. He had fought for Granger, for the cross, for the right to honor both without compromising his duty. In the days that followed, Reed's story became a touchstone. Veterans hailed him as a champion, while legal scholars debated the case's implications for religious freedom. Halbridge, true to his word, met Reed privately, offering an apology and a handshake. The judge shared his own story. A son who had served in Iraq, a family that knew loss. It was a moment of reconciliation. Two men finding common ground in their respect for service. The cross remained on Reed's uniform, a silent testament to a battle won through understanding. But the ripple effects went further. Across Britain, the case sparked conversations in pubs, churches, and parliament. Families of fallen soldiers wrote to Reed, sharing stories of their own keepsakes. A locket, a ring, a faded letter, each a link to the past. Schools invited him to speak, and though he declined most offers, he visited a veterans' hospital, where he sat with old soldiers and listened to their tales. The cross, he told them, was not his alone. It belonged to every soul who had given their all. In quiet moments, Reed thought of Granger, imagining. The story of Captain Nathaniel Reed became a modern parable, told and retold in the heart of Britain. It was a tale of pride, of sacrifice, and of a soldier who, without raising his voice, reminded the nation what it meant to stand for something greater. The lesson was clear. True victory lies not in defeating an opponent, but in making them see, hear, and understand. Nathaniel Reed had done just that. And in doing so, he had honored not only his fallen comrade, but the very soul of the nation he served.